Today, I'm fortunate to be talking with Katherine Ellison. She's a well-known journalist. She, she'll
You want
she'll
to
be
do that
talking
again?
about her own ADHD, but she also has written a book about her ADHD and her family with her son, Buzz. Katherine, welcome. So nice
Thank you
to
so
have you
much.
with us today. I have a series of questions that I'll be asking all the women I interview. The first question is, how did you realize you might have ADHD? What were the signs and symptoms that you experienced as a child and as a teenager that you now recognize were ADHD?
Like a lot of parents, I only realized that it was ADHD. I knew something was going on, but I only realized it was ADHD in helping my child. So when my son was being diagnosed, I was standing over his shoulder looking at the questions he was answering and answering yes in my mind to all of them. But then that made me look back at my past, and I realized that something had been going on for many years, that I was clumsy. I rode my bike into parked car. I was very erratic in my performance at school. Some subjects were great, others not so great, those kinds of things.
Many people say, I always knew I was different. Would you say that applied to you?
Yeah, definitely. One of the big problems is in relationships. Like you look at other people and they seem to be getting along so well, and you're the one who's always causing trouble or getting into fights and things.
Ah, huh. I'm recently reading a novel and it's by a British woman, and I'm fascinated at how they talk to each other. And I just think maybe that's where I could learn how to talk better is by reading novels and
What's the
reading.
book? What's
It's
the book?
it's this book. She writes with a lot of humor,
Hmm.
but the characters just talk so brilliantly. And I think, I don't, how do they learn to talk like that?
And do they talk like that in real life? I think that it's a continuing
Oh,
struggle for many of us to, as we look at other people who seem to get along with others so naturally.
yes,
How do they do it?
yes, yeah. And I was wondering when you were looking over your son's symptoms, it it just started to ring a bell with you, but you didn't know at the time that ADHD was highly inheritable.
I learned a lot. I was so fortunate to get a book contract that gave me more than a year off my usual work to just delve into this. So I learned about the heritability and so much more.
So you did your learning for writing the book.
Pretty much, which
Yeah.
was such a great advantage because so many parents have to reinvent the wheel. They land in this emergency situation where they need to help a child in trouble, and they're scrambling to learn.
What were some of the biggest challenges you were facing when you got diagnosed? And do you remember any specific things that were helping you in your school or work before your diagnosis?
I'll take the second question first.
Sure.
My mother was really very fit, and she noticed I was a chubby kid and got me on a bike when I was like 9 or 10 years old. And the
Mm.
two of us would bike ride. And through her, I really learned physical fitness. And I, along the way, I realized how much it was helping me mentally and emotionally. So, really, all my life since then, not just to keep my weight down, but to keep my brain active. I've done some kind of exercise, usually in the morning, some kind of intense exercise, and that has been huge in
And you
all
were
the
doing that
research.
before you knew you had ADHD.
Exactly.
It just was you realized, oh, this makes me function better.
But there's so much research showing how much exercise can help any kind of brain.
Mhm. What were some of the biggest challenges you faced before you were diagnosed? What was happening in your life that
So many things.
people would look at you and say, how could you say you had challenges? You were so successful. You were a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist. Are you fooling us when you say you had challenges?
My mother used to say that a lot. Like,
Oh,
stop complaining. There's nothing, you're so prolific. There's no way that you have any kind of disorder. But
uh-huh.
I would like to point out that about 4 years before I won that Pulitzer, I was sued for $11 million for a stupid reporting mistake that was just a matter of carelessness. And it came on the heels of many mistakes that I was making in my job that nearly got me fired. I was careless even when I knew what the stakes were. I couldn't seem to stop making mistakes until I really trained myself. And it took a real crisis to do that.
When you say careless and you attribute that to the ADHD, the carelessness,
I think
can
it
you
must have
explain the
been,
connection?
who knows? And a psychiatrist would have to go into depth about whether I was sabotaging myself for some kind of reason, like scared of success. There's a million different explanations for it. How can you say that any one hurricane is because of global warming? But these hurricanes were happening, and it could have been a constellation of ADHD undermining my self confidence
Uh,
because I felt out of control a lot of times, like I wasn't in control of what I was doing.
yeah. Were you thinking about?
I've thought about those mistakes, as you can imagine, in depth, and even wrote a book about that lawsuit and what happened because of it. It's called Mothers and Murders. But I think it was just a combination of things. One thing is, as much as you know what you should do, you sometimes just aren't able to do it. So I knew I should be checking my work. So why didn't I? Why didn't
Mm,
I eagle
uh,
eye every word? And it took so many mistakes for me to actually get that discipline that it's rather bizarre. I took a class
yes,
in college where a professor would give us an F if we misspelled something. Why didn't that teach us? Why didn't that teach me? But it didn't.
I see. Yeah, I can relate to that. What do you think are the major tools and strategies you have that help you now with your ADHD?
Exercise is number one.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing is some kind of mindfulness practice. Like I don't do it routinely, but I do try to meditate.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the things that's helped me the most is just to help my child. I had to help myself because I was very temperamental with him. I was short-tempered, I was bored, and I had to get a lot of therapy along the way to deal with the fallout from my ADHD for so many years being diagnosed. And I think that has helped me a lot. I lean on so much of what I learned through that. So it's just a combination, Cynthia, of a lot of learning, a lot of
Mm-hmm.
introspection, a lot of trying to make sure I have good habits.
I think a lot of it is somehow just learning new ways behaving and forcing yourself to behave those ways so that they become a part of who you are.
Sometimes we need other supports like an understanding
Oh,
spouse or
yes,
little
yes.
signs everywhere. Yeah.
Uh-huh, yeah, to stay on track. But did the medication play any role? Because for me, medication helped me to put the habits in place. And once I got them in place, I didn't feel like I needed the medication.
That's really interesting. At one point, my psychiatrist told me that I should be taking some kind of anti-anxiety medication because without that, I wouldn't be able to focus enough to really benefit from therapy, or it would just take me so much longer.
Oh,
So
so
I
now
had,
never the ADHD meds.
I do
Oh,
now, only in the last several years. If I have a lot of really boring work to do, I will sometimes take Vyvanse. It keeps me in my chair. And then
yes.
before I know it, the day is over and I've produced something. I know that there's some people who it's been life changing for. And I can say that the ADHD medication has been for me. Anti anxiety medication has been. I
Mm.
don't think I could function these days without it.
When you got your ADHD diagnosis later in your life, how did it make you feel about yourself?
Both good and bad. It was more disturbing than I'd expected to know that I had a brain disorder. That's a stark thing to have to deal with, and it felt overwhelming. It was also in part a relief because there was an explanation and it wasn't just that I wasn't trying hard enough. So
Mm.
it was really a mix of feelings.
Was there a feeling of shame about having the disorder at all? Or
Yeah.
in what year were you diagnosed?
I was diagnosed when I was 48 years old. So that was now 16, 18 years ago. Almost 20 years ago. And yeah, it was just I think what shame I did feel some shame with it, but it was shame that compounded other shame. Like I'd been ashamed all my life of
Ah,
just missing the mark in so many ways.
hmm. Yeah, for me, I felt I got diagnosed like 10 years earlier than you, and I felt people It was very apparent to other people that I had ADHD, and I felt so ashamed of that. And I had to tell myself that getting the diagnosis only made things better. It didn't make anything worse, it made things better. But yeah, I had a lot of shame about it. Actually, knowing your child had it and then suddenly thinking that you have it, it's a double whammy in a way.
And I don't think you need the diagnosis for this, but seeing a child struggle in ways that you struggled
Oh, yes.
is a shame inducing experience for sure.
Did being undiagnosed for so many years cause problems in your life?
I believe it did. I think it's one reason that I am so anxious. It wasn't just, there were family circumstances. We had a kind of a chaotic family life, and that made me anxious. But I think also the chaos that was inside me was produced anxiety because, like I say, I would make mistakes and I wouldn't know why.
Yes. Yeah, Dr. Hallowell talks about that variability in performance and how that I think can produce anxiety because you can't count on the fact that I'm going to be awesome this time. I was awesome last week, but I don't know why. And
Exactly.
so, can I be awesome this week when I don't know how? You know? And I'm sure you came from a family that had high expectations for you.
Very high expectations. All three of my older siblings became doctors.
Uh,
Two were psychiatrists, which also tells you something about our family.
uh, So, what support systems have been most helpful to you? You talked about therapy. Is there anything else that comes up for you as being a key thing in helping you on your journey?
Yeah, therapy was really life-saving. I have to say, I think it was literally life-saving.
And did you
And
start that only after your diagnosis or
no, I started it after
uh,
I made that horrible mistake and got sued.
ah,
There was
mm,
an editor at the paper
oh,
who basically told me, maybe you need
so
help.
you were improving your life even earlier.
And it's the best. That was the first best thing I ever did. And then marrying my wonderful husband was the next best thing and
Mm,
another
yeah.
life-saving support because I think, as my older son told me recently, he was probably the only person who ever would have stayed with me all these years.
Oh,
It's
and
so
when people
important.
read my book, they say it's very apparent she has a supportive husband.
And I think that this is a problem with a lot of people with ADHD. They think that they should marry somebody who's CD or more critical because that person's going to help them be better. But
Ah,
what you really need for the long term and for you to have any hope of being gentle with yourself is somebody who's more gentle with you, the person that you're closest to. You can look for friends who are critical or judgmental, but not your spouse.
uncritical,
Unconditional love.
yeah,
Yeah.
unconditional love. Are there any books? I know that your own book, but other websites or resources that you would recommend, especially for parents, that you think were really helpful?
Let me see. I have to say, I really do want to recommend Buzz because I tried my hardest as both a journalist and somebody who's in the midst of the situation to provide the kind of company that I wished I'd had along the way,
Ah,
and also the kind of advice, the kind of unbiased advice that is hard to get elsewhere.
mm,
Because you look on the internet, there's a lot of predatory salespeople
ah,
who are
mhm.
trying to tell you that there's some kind of magic bullet for this problem, and there just isn't. It's not medication, not anything else. All these things can help, but nothing is going to solve it overnight, which is what you so desperately want. Other resources, I think Ed Hallowell's books were pioneering, are fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
I would look on the web for things that say .org or .edu before you look at
Uh-huh.
them that say
Yeah,
.ca.
I think Attitude Magazine does an awesome job. They have wonderful articles and webinars. So I always refer parents to that. I personally will give a shout out for my book, Living with Inattentive ADHD, because so many girls, that's the type of ADHD they have. Although we know boys have that type too, and it's overlooked. I think it gives a good understanding of the broad impacts of ADHD. People don't understand often that it's more than inattention, it's more than distraction.
I agree. And what I loved about your book is how honest it is and how
Mhm.
unflinching about what you were up against in your life. And that's really necessary because so many people are so invested in looking perfect. And that's the first thing we have to let go of, which is another reason I want to say that one of the best resources I've also had are women friends who are in the same position, because
Ah,
other mothers were so judgmental with me that I couldn't have made it without finding other women who had children
oh,
like I had and
oh,
could
ah,
empathize. Yeah.
yeah. And some people don't have that available, but it is available online. There is support in Facebook and Reddit. So that's a good thing for parents to know. Do you have any advice that you would give a young girl who's just been diagnosed?
The first one, I think, is to develop some self-compassion, because it's very easy to be critical, so harshly critical of yourself, and try to get out of that habit. The disorder is an excuse, but you do want to understand how it affects you, and to be educated as much as possible about it. There's so many resources. This is one of the great things about getting this label, is that it connects you to a world of resources. Some not so great, but some really are good. Learn about it and find what you're good at. I think that
Mm,
another thing that I unconsciously did was I doubled down on the one thing I could do fairly well, which was I loved writing and reporting, and
mhm.
just focused on that. And after a certain amount of time, didn't keep pushing myself to be a generalist, but gave myself permission to just obsessively do what I liked and did best.
Mhm.
And that's
Yeah,
good
and I
advice for
think the
parents.
piece you're kind of saying too is the understanding yourself is
Yeah.
very important. That comes with the self-acceptance because you understand yourself, you accept yourself better. So for the parents, what I've been told too is it's so important for the parents be accepting of their child. And I think for you and I, maybe we didn't get that because our parents didn't know. And I think once the parents know, it changes their frame of reference too. They start realizing I can't expect this of her when she has a brain that can't do that, you
And the
know?
flip side of that is, just as you encourage your own strength and double down on them, you should do that with your children.
Oh,
Find
yes.
what they're good at and help them develop that, because that's where they're going to get the applause rather than the criticism in life.
Do you have one thing that you think is the most important to tell a young girl?
Oh man. It just goes back to the self-compassion, to it's so easy to judge yourself and get into groups of judgy people. That would be that.
The other thing I would say is that having ADD does not prevent you from doing anything you want to do in life. That you can have examples of people like Catherine or like Simone Biles or Michael Phelps, or there's just people in every field that are successful with their ADHD. So even if the diagnosis initially discourages you, don't let it hold you back.
I do have to say that if I knew my brain surgeon had ADHD, I probably would find somebody else, because you can make those little mistakes. You have to
Uh,
forgive yourself for mistakes, but
oh,
I think it's important to get into jobs where you can be forgiven.
I have to speak up for the brain surgeon because I think they hyper focus and then they
Yeah.
can perform. You tried medication, but it didn't work for you to so great. The therapy has helped you. Did your therapist know about ADHD? Did you get therapy that was appropriate? Because sometimes people go to get therapy, and if the therapist doesn't know about ADHD, they're getting advice that doesn't work for them.
On the other hand, sometimes the comorbidities like anxiety and depression can be more harmful than the
Mm,
ADHD.
mm-hmm,
So I was really fortunate that my psychiatrist tuned into just how anxious I was
mm.
and depressed at the time. And by working on those things, I was later able to deal better with the ADHD. I came back to him, I think it was like when I was writing the book, when I was writing Buzz, and I said, "Do you think I have ADHD?" And he said, "Oh, yeah, definitely." But he never really diagnosed me.
Yeah, yeah, that's it's always unpleasant to have someone say, "Oh, it's so obvious," and yet we never saw it. Okay.
I would say really work on your friendship skills. Find people who aren't as judgmental of you. Don't make the mistake of getting into with really critical friends, but also with the friends that you do have, really be open to their pointing out stuff about you and don't be
Mm.
defensive, and
Ah,
really try to work on relationship skills because that's so important. It's so important to have friends, and you really want to, don't think you can go it alone.
yeah. As you were saying that though, because I had a son that got into trouble, that someone advised me that you don't want your child to be friends with just people that would accept them. Going with that lowest common denominator.
I think that's a really great characteristic in a friend.
Oh, that they do accept you. Yes, she got into a crowd that drank a lot.
That shouldn't be your only
Choose
game.
friends that are a good relationship for you. Both things. Have friends, but they have to be ones that accept you, but they're good role models for
I
you.
don't think that you have to have low quality friends because there's something wrong with you. Yeah,
Yes, because I think girls sometimes do that too. They're so
sure,
desperate for social
sure.
relationships that they will act any way, do anything to be accepted. So, can you share any success stories that you think came from learning about your ADHD or learning to manage it?
Okay, so those are two different things. Attribute like successes due to my ADHD, I would say that hyper focus and that relentlessness, even though that's cost me in some ways, that's been a great thing at work. I work
Yeah.
very fast.
Uh-huh.
I've learned to mostly work on things that I'm interested in, so I don't
Hmm.
get
Yeah.
bored and sabotage myself. Things, successes due to learning about ADHD, I would have to say, first of all, that I have really good relationships with my two sons and my husband. And that's taken some work and a lot of not being defensive and learning about what I could do better.
Mm-hmm.
So really, those are the biggest gifts of my life.
Has your understanding of ADHD changed how you see yourself?
Yeah, I think it has given me more self-compassion. It's reinforced my understanding that I need to manage my life. I need to have routines. I need to be busy. It's helped me work on friendships and develop some really good friendships.
It's really improved my self-esteem and self-confidence.
And being out about it, like it's all over my website. So
Uh-huh.
if somebody hires me as a consultant or write a report or whatever, if I make some mistake, it's on them in a way.
Oh, uh-huh.
Not that I do a lot.
I think that self-acceptance is a huge piece, and then
Yeah.
becoming proud of what you're capable of doing. Do you think having ADHD has prevented you from realizing any of your dreams?
Mm. My dreams are partly because of my ADHD. I wanted a job that was really interesting and high stimulation.
For me, I wrote in my book that when I graduated from high school, I felt I was going to do something remarkable in my life. And then the next 30 years, I didn't feel that way. It wasn't until my diagnosis that I started on a trajectory where I started to feel I was doing something.
Because
And
you have the
so,
confidence, because you've really bloomed professionally and for sure in the last few years. Yeah.
but I think my thing before was that I had all these issues that I wasn't aware of. I just wasn't a good employee. I just wasn't good. And so when I got
You look
diagnosed,
good. I'm sure.
you look back and you wish you had been different earlier. You understand why people were upset with you.
Oh, yeah. So I guess one dream is that definitely has fallen by the wayside because of the ADHD is that some of my friends have friends that they've kept through high school,
Uh,
right? Where they meet twice a year and they have
uh,
retreats and
yeah.
or they go off with other couples. And I haven't been able to develop, it's only late in life that I've really been able to develop really
Mm.
good, solid friendships. And just a few weeks ago went off on a trip with a friend. But yeah, I feel like that might have been worked out better for sure had I not
Uh-huh.
had these
Yeah.
relationship problems that are due to ADHD.
Yeah. If we got started sooner. we would have had different lives. But the
Sure.
lives we created, we're still content with. Do you feel like, I guess not, because you say you're really out and about with your ADHD, but do you ever feel like you've encountered stigma or misconceptions? Are you having to educate people?
Yeah, I don't feel like it's my job to educate people out and about in the one that if somebody says ADD, I'm not going to say, no, it's ADHD. It was changed in 1987 or whatever. But one thing that is a pet peeve is when somebody will say, oh, everybody has ADHD
Yeah.
and confuse it with this kind of popcorn brain. Not that I think I'm so special because I have genuine ADHD.
Yeah, we're the real thing. You guys are pretenders.
I've got the neurodevelopmental disorder. But I do think everybody's attention span has been damaged by our information economy. But yeah, I think probably there is a lot of thinking that it's a myth and that people are using it as an excuse.
What I say to people is if someone's a little bit overweight, would you call them obese? If someone has a little bit of ADHD behavior, would you say they have ADHD? I think it's that big of a difference
Oh, wow.
between
Yeah,
having an occasional
right.
incident of forgetfulness or carelessness or distraction, but to have it be a massive thing in your life is that degree of difference.
It is on a spectrum too. I think you
Right.
can have milder symptoms for sure.
Right. Everyone
Yeah.
has some, but it depends the degree. So it's just like some people can be a little bit overweight, but
Yeah.
it's not considered a health problem until
Right.
you're a lot overweight.
You only diagnose somebody with ADHD if it's impairing, right?
Yes,
That's
right.
the clinical
Yeah.
evaluation.
Mhm. And is there anything you wish to tell parents about living with ADHD?
If your child has it, and you might have it too, you just really owe yourself to take the time to learn about it and learn what are some of the best ways to approach it and learn how to be more compassionate and how more supportive in the way that your child and yourself need.
Mhm. Mhm. I think that I guess I'm a big advocate for early diagnosis. We're hoping to get girls diagnosed by age 8 because they've been massively missed. And even now, they say they're getting diagnosed, but they're not doing it till 12 or 13 years old. And there's already those years where they've been suffering. I think it has an impact. Some people say that it's almost like a trauma to be undiagnosed with your ADHD because you're getting people to tell you're lazy or you're
I
not
agree.
motivated and they just don't see that you're struggling.
I agree.
And sometimes what shocked me too is to learn that the girls learn to mask. So it becomes harder to identify their ADHD because they want so hard to fit in.
Yeah.
No, those are the things I'd like parents to know is
And
to
that's
really
what
be
you
on the
get.
alert.
Like Stephen Hinshaw has done this brilliant longitudinal research that shows the much greater rates of depression and anxiety and substance abuse and suicide thoughts and attempts among girls who are not diagnosed. So they're really concrete examples of the damage it can do.
Thank you, Catherine. It's been great to talk with you. I'd like to check in again later. Bye.
Thanks, Cynthia. We'll talk soon. Bye.
We believe all girls with ADHD should get a fair start in life by getting diagnosed by age 8. Visit us at www.findtheadhdgirls.org. Thank you.